Warning, this video may go against typical historical narratives and will be discussing a disturbing part of history in America. If you're resistant to alternative ideas, this video may be difficult to understand and digest. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, my wonderful and dear viewer. I think you are pretty smart, so I have a pop quiz for you. If I showed you this photo right here, this castle right here, what country in Europe do you think this came from? I'll give you an honest minute to think about it. Maybe Germany or Austria? No. This picture right here was taken in San Bernardino, California. San Bernardino, California. Well, if you guessed that this is actually an insane asylum for people in the 1800s, you would be correct. When I was made aware of the existence of this building, I wanted to see it for myself, to see if it was still standing. So I actually traveled myself to go to San Bernardino to see if there was any remnants of this. However, what I found when I went there led me down a much stranger rabbit hole, and this place is not all that it seems. And the more digging I did, the stranger it became over time. So first, I'm gonna give you a quick rundown of all the mainstream history of this place and the traditional history that they would tell you. Then I'm gonna go travel in person to go see the site itself, see if there's any remnants, any remaining buildings around. And then finally, after all of that, I'm gonna be going into the much deeper, weirder, stranger, and hidden history of this place and all the other mental asylums in America to see if the narrative that they present about this place is actually true. So if that sounds at all interesting to you, get ready. We're gonna hop in right now. Let's get it. What is good, my friends? I'm here today to talk about the Patton State Hospital history and all this stuff. I made a huge chart, essentially, trying to mind map all my thoughts and try and do it in a sequential way to kind of fill you in as we go along. So I think we're first going to start by zooming here on this mainstream history of Patton State Hospital. So if you guessed that this is an insane asylum for mentally insane or challenged people in the late 1800s, you would be correct, actually. This masterpiece was officially named the Southern California State Asylum for the Insane and Inebriated, and according to Wikipedia, this building was actually established, not built, in 1890, and officially it opened in 1893. It was renamed to Patton State Hospital in 1927 after Harry Patton, who was a member of the board of managers for the hospital. Now, you have to understand, this is not the only massive and intricate insane asylum found in the US, as more than 70 different institutions suddenly appeared throughout the mid-1800s into the early 1900s in America. As you can see, this one is from Pontiac, Michigan. It's pretty crazy, actually. And here is a map showing all of the current and former Kirkbride hospitals, as they're called. A big gap here, but there's a ton of them on this part of the coast and some on the west coast. And right here is where Patton is. And for us to understand the importance of these buildings and how they redefine American history, we need to first be informed about the mainstream history of these insane asylums and the history of insane asylums and mentally ill people in America in the 1800s. And once we're finally all on the same page and have the same knowledge base, we're going to begin to poke holes in the official narrative and discover more of the occulted history and relevance of this building to the total history of America. So let's start here with the history of mental illness. I'm probably going to skip a little bit forward to, look what they're doing to these people in the 1500s, drilling in their skulls. It's horrible. This is called trephination. We'll get back to that. Sometime in the 1700s, in England, humanitarian reforms arose from religious concerns, and William Tuke urged the Yorkshire Quaker Society to establish a retreat. So they established this York Retreat in 1796. This is Dorothea Dix. She's really important to the story. We'll get back to her. While America had asylums for the mentally ill, such as the Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia and the Williamsburg Hospital, established in 1756 and 1773, the theory of mental illness at the time led to treatments like bloodletting, gyrators, tranquilizer chairs, weird stuff. And eventually there was a rise in what was called moral treatment, and it was a philosophy that changed how mentally ill and insane people were treated during this time period. As it says, it had to be abandoned in America in the late half of the 19th century when these asylums became overcrowded, which we'll get to. Let's read through. This is Asylum Projects. This is a website which basically has all the history of all the different insane asylums and everything. It's been a quite useful resource. So let's just run through basically what the official history is for this Patton State Hospital. So let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. So Patton State Hospital is a major forensic medical hospital operated in California, San Bernardino. It was first opened August 1st of 1893. In 1927, it was renamed Patton State Hospital. It currently has a capacity of 1,200 people and who have been committed by judicial system for treatment. Let's hop forward a little bit to the history. In 1889, the California legislature approved the grand construction of Patton in order to provide care to those deemed mentally ill in Southern California. The Grand Lodge of the Free and Accepted Masons of California laid the cornerstone of the original building on December 15th, 1890. At the time of its establishment, Patton was seen as a state-of-the-art mental health care facility designed alongside the Kirkbride plan, a popular plan for large asylums in the 19th century. The Kirkbride, as the main building was called, was an elaborate and grandiose structure with extensive grounds, which was meant to promote a healthy environment in which to recover. Okay, we gotta slow down and rewind for a second, because that's very interesting that the Freemasons of California laid the cornerstone of the original building back in 1890. So it opened and received its first patients on August 1st, 1893, under the name Southern California State Asylum for the Insane and Inebriates. By 1904, so this is 10 years basically after it opened, it had over 800 patients. So that's dramatically more than Kirkbride had envisioned. And to ease overcrowding, the state hospitals basically used deportation, parole, probation, and sterilization as means to reduce patient populations. The need to release patients was a driving factor behind California's trend of sterilizing over 11,000 mentally ill state hospital patients from the passage of its Asexualization Act in 1909 through 1950. So, in 1909, a eugenics law was passed in California allowing for state institutions to sterilize those deemed unfit or feeble-minded. The Asexualization Act authorized involuntary sterilization of certain groups of people, including inmates of state hospitals, certain institutionalized people, life sentence prisoners, repeat offenders of certain sexual offenses, or simply repeat offenders. As one of the leading states enforced sterilization victims, California's sterilization procedures primarily took place in state mental hospitals. So anyone that they would deem crazy or unfit, they just ended their bloodline, basically. That is unbelievably messed up. Sterilizations at Patton made up nearly half of that total at 4,585 patient sterilizations. No other state in the U.S. has sterilized as many people as the state of California. Some medical practitioners believed that sterilization of medical patients was therapeutic, but most doctors who were involved in sterilizing patients did it for eugenic purposes. It was thought that sterilizing patients would keep them from passing on their illnesses to their progeny and would keep future generations from further overcrowding the hospitals. Oh my god, that is difficult to unpack. Patton's grounds were expanded in the first decade to include a 400-acre farm and ranch, which provided nearly all the food for the hospital. The hospital constructed a bunch of industrial shops. It was all self-sustaining. This was seen as therapeutic and referred to as occupational or industrial therapy. So they would lock these people up who were supposedly mentally insane and use them for labor. Super cool. I'm glad that California doesn't do anything like that nowadays, does it? Anyways, as a self-sufficient town, Patton had also gotten its own post office and its own postal code. So this whole building was essentially its own self-sufficient town. It was 400 acres. It was huge. Earthquakes in 1906, 1916, 1923, and 1933 caused major damage to the original buildings. This originally led to the destruction of the Kirkbride building and establishment of more modern buildings in the 1950s. The need for another state hospital in the southern half of the state resulted in the opening of the Metropolitan State Hospital in Norwalk. So here it goes through some of the other therapies they use, like hydrotherapy, utilizing shock therapy, electroconvulsive therapy. That's a good one. Lobotomy, introduced in 1947. That's great. Oh, great. 3 different types of lobotomies. Okay. Then they were using chloropromazine for treating mentally ill people as well. It's just, wow. Okay. Cemetery. This is the last section I want to talk about on this page. There were approximately 2,022 former patients buried in a field with a dirt road that runs up to it. These patients, whose bodies were left unclaimed or whose families were unknown, today is well marked as a cemetery ground and there's a mass grave marker. The cemetery was full by 1930. After that, when people died and were unclaimed, their bodies were donated to research at what is now called Loma Linda Library. So there was all sorts of just absolutely diabolical stuff going on here, even after the people die. Sending their bodies to do research and scientific experiments on and such. Some crazy stuff.
What is good, my friends? Today we are actually here on the grounds of Patton State Hospital. This place is already giving me some pretty weird vibes, I'm not going to lie to you. Right across the way from me is the Department of Corrections over there. I read a sign when I came here that basically said, by entering this place, you basically forfeit your right to not have your car searched or your, person searched. So that's already kind of off-putting. I came here today because I wanted to check this place out. It's got some really interesting history. There's a museum here detailing the past of this area, what it used to look like, and it looks pretty insane. So I was reading up on a bit of the history. This is one of the major insane asylums, as they say, that was here in Southern California. It was established in 1891. I don't know why, I just really feel on edge here, a little paranoid. I could also be feeling the weight of the history of this place because from what I understand, there's been some pretty wild things that have happened here over the years. But hopefully we can just check out this museum with no problems. Hopefully there will be no problems. So if the mic quality gets worse, it's because I'm not going to be wearing my mic. I don't want to look like someone trying to dig their nose too much into stuff. There's security and stuff all over the place. So we're just going to have to keep it low key. Hopefully just check out this museum and see if we can't learn anything here. This is where the museum is. Looks like there's a front door entrance here. A little plaque. From 1909, 1979, thousands of people who lived in state-run hospitals, homes, institutions were involuntarily sterilized under California eugenics laws. All of these laws were repealed in 1975. It was later found that forced or coerced sterilizations continued and performed under the duty of the state prisons. This is a memorial to the recognition of the survivors who dedicated themselves to educating others on the history of eugenics and deeply harmful sterilization practices to make a more just society. Damn. Alright, here's this little courtyard behind the place. If I keep recording, I'm going to get in trouble though. I got pulled over by some... Sorry, let me roll the windows. I got pulled over by two armed guards, and basically they told me not to take any pictures of this place. They said it was okay for me to walk around, but it's like a restricted area, so don't take any photos. So I kind of just low-key went back to my car. I think I might dip out. I don't know if I can get much more footage out here without causing any problems. He said that I need to schedule a tour to go inside the museum online, so because it was locked when I approached it. Yeah, I was right to feel off about this place. This place is creepy. I'm not sure what to think about it. We'll figure it out. Peace. What's up, my friends? I was getting a really, really bad vibe from being parked up in there. My car was even not properly starting up. I was trying to reverse it, it wasn't going anywhere. I had to turn it off 2 or 3 times just to get it to work. It was very strange. I decided to go gambling. What's good, y'all? I just got out of the casino. I spent 20 bucks. I came out with 55, so I netted 35. I'm feeling good. But yeah, I'm probably just gonna head home now. But yeah, fuck.
Prepare yourself for what we're going to be discussing in this video, and please try and have an open mind about this. It's going to take me a long time to deconstruct the entire history of it all. I certainly do not have all the answers. All I really have is a lot of questions. And remember, always use your discernment.
Mental illness in 1800s America. So in the mid-1800s, there was supposedly a massive rise in insanity cases due to a number of factors. The War of 1812, the Industrial Revolution was a massive contributing factor. There was a massive movement from people living out in the countryside in rural environments into cities, mass migration from the farmlands into cities. That caused a lot of overcrowding and insanity. And the Civil War as well was a massive contributing factor as well. This is Dorothea Dix, and she was an advocate, a reformer, they call it, on behalf of poor and mentally ill people. And she testified to the New Jersey state legislature on behalf of the institutionalized lunatics in 1844, because prior to 1844, they were being held in penitentiaries, madhouses, small establishments where their treatments were pretty messed up, if you saw some of this stuff up here. After this 1844 speech, she began traveling all around the U.S. to different places like New Hampshire, Louisiana, documenting all the conditions of the mentally ill there, and basically making reports and pleas to state legislatures to open these insane asylum institutions. Now here's the other, probably most important guy in the whole story, Thomas Kirkbride. So this guy, also in the year of 1844, the physician Thomas Kirkbride founded the the Association of Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane, AMSA-II. He previously worked as the superintendent of the Pennsylvania Hospital for the Insane in 1840. This experience, I guess, inspired him to create the Kirkbride Plan, which had a humanitarian vision of treatment for the mentally ill. The Kirkbride was a architectural style, basically a guidebook to follow for insane asylums. This is a sketch right here of the very first state lunatic asylum in Trenton, New Jersey, which opened 4 years later in 1848. As you can see, quite a massive building here with a pretty distinct layout, this winged layout, this wide, expansive layout. And so the Kirkbride Plan was a design philosophy to create beautiful and intricate mental hospitals as, quote, a special apparatus for the care for lunacy whose grounds should be highly improved and tastefully ornamented. In his book, he basically goes on to describe and suggest that each room be at least 12 feet high, the surrounding landscape be minimum of 100 acres, have a bunch of abundant wildlife, and it's built on the idea of having a beautiful environment and a living space for the insane that is both humane and conducive to healing that insanity, that mental illness. He envisioned these massive structures having a maximum of 250 inmates at any given time to basically prevent overcrowding and ensure quality care is given to each individual. And here are some examples of Kirkbride buildings. This is the Harrisburg State Hospital in Pennsylvania. Pretty similar looking design, very, very big. This one's pretty crazy. This is the Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts in 1893. Look at this. It is an absolutely massive, sorry guys, one second. Absolutely massive, beautiful building. Then we got the Weston State Hospital in West Virginia. I believe this was around the 1860s and 70s. Then we got this one. This one's crazy. The Columbus State Hospital for the Insane in Ohio. I forget exactly which year this one was, but the architecture, the size of it are absolutely insane. It's kind of crazy to look at. You see this huge building out in the middle of what seems like pretty much nowhere. You know, looks like a field with some dirt road to get there. You know, and then you have this massive work of infrastructure. Pretty crazy stuff. So let's circle back. The very first Kirkbride Asylum. It opened in 1848 in New Jersey. So 4 years after Dorothea Dix had her first speech to the New Jersey Senate, essentially. This Kirkbride Asylum was established/founded by Dorothea Dix herself. And the architect was this guy, John Notman, who simultaneously was working on a hall at Princeton. He was working on this state lunatic asylum. He was working on a hot springs in Virginia. He seemed to just finished working on this other church, and he's got a bunch of other buildings that he's been working on around this time. So this guy is, you know, kind of a beast, I have to say. You know, it's pretty crazy how many buildings he built in different places all over in such a short period of time. Here's a not so fun fact about this place, the Trenton State Hospital. In 1907, this guy, Dr. Henry Cotton, took over as the main medical director, and he believed that infections were the root cause of mental illness. So he basically had people's teeth pulled, other body parts removed, and basically mutilated and killed hundreds of people and mutilated thousands of people even. And even when he was no longer medical director, the teeth pulling practice still continued all the way through the 1960s. Okay, so yeah, next section. The rise of the Kirkbride buildings. So, from the year 1848 onward, we notice a very interesting phenomenon. All across the country, Kirkbride buildings begin to appear Kirkbride buildings appear very rapidly, with multiple hospitals even built in the same year. And they're found all around the country, but the vast majority are clustered in the eastern half of the U.S., as we saw earlier on that map. And here is a list of all these buildings. Notice how many got built in the mid-50s, a ton of them built in the 60s, right during the Civil War era, all the way through until about 1890 when it slows down. Even outside the United States, there's a few of these hospitals as well, in Canada and I believe Australia. So, following the end of the Civil War, there was a massive explosion in founding Kirkbride buildings from the 1860s through 1880s, and like I said, gradually slowing down towards the turn of the century. There was a total of 73 Kirkbride buildings established between the years of 1845 and 1910. Exactly 40 of them have been demolished, leaving 33 standing, either partially or fully. That's very interesting. Exactly 33 are left standing. We'll get back to that. Here is a map showing the difference between what was originally all of the Kirkbride buildings versus how many are left today. As we can see, the Patton State Hospital one was destroyed along with the ones in NorCal, and a lot of them on the East Coast as well. So the only ones left on the West Coast are up in Oregon. And here we have some notable Kirkbride buildings as well. This one, Alabama, got some pretty crazy stuff. Danvers in Massachusetts, we went over that. Pittsburgh, Michigan, New Jersey. This one, Napa State Hospital, we'll get to later. That one's crazy. Oregon State Hospital, that's one that still exists. Same with, I believe, this one in West Virginia. And, okay, let's see. Honestly, each and every one of these hospitals has its own pretty crazy and wild backstory behind it, but we need to circle back to the actual focus and topic of this video, and that would be Patton State Hospital. And Patton State Hospital was one of the very last Kirkbride buildings to be established, and it was established in 1890, while it officially opened in 1893, as I've said before. So, but let's go to this next article. This I found, and this article blew my mind away. This is on PBS SoCal, so, pretty reputable organization. This was published back in 2015, The Insane Asylum, the first 20 years of Patton State Hospital. So, it's a quiet Sunday afternoon on the outskirts of Patton State Hospital. The sprawling mental health complex seemed to stretch on forever in an economically depressed road in San Bernardino County. The hospital employs over 2,700 people and provides treatment to thousands of forensically and civilly committed patients. Today, Patton feels more like a hardscrabble rural town than a home of a last resort for the mentally unwell. This was not always the case. Near an employee parking lot is a chunk of the red brick building, all that is left to remind us of the original hospital, which opened its doors in 1893. This towering Gothic building, which was torn down after 1923, was like a mammoth castle in a terrifying Grimm's fairy tale. The sick, the lost, the violent, and the addicted all ended up behind its thick walls. Some were restored to sanity, some escaped, and others simply succumbed to their fate. This is the passage that really caught my eye. So, The Insane Asylum. This is from the LA Times. I assume this is written at the time that this was all happening in the 1890s. Quote, San Bernardino is full of people who have turned out from all over Southern California to witness the laying of the cornerstone of the Insane Asylum. 3 long trains carrying military companies, Knights Templar, state officers, masons, invited guests, and a large crowd left for the asylum grounds at 2:30 p.m. this afternoon. Thousands of people also went in carriages from the city and all parts of the country to witness the cornerstone ceremonies. It was estimated that the assemblage on the grounds would number from 8 to 10,000. The grand number then proceeded with the program, of vocal music being furnished by a Masonic quartet from Los Angeles. Governor Waterman, who was the governor of California at the time, made a short address, designating this as the proudest day of his life, from the LA Times. Ooh, wow. Okay. So, first off, people are coming from all around Southern California and all around the country, including the Knights Templar, military, Masons, as in Freemasons, a bunch of guests, and up to 10,000 people were at this ceremony. Keep in mind, the entire population of the city of San Bernardino at this time was somewhere between 4,000 to 6,000 people. So this is more than double the population of the entire city coming here to have this cornerstone laying ceremony. And that is very choice, isn't it? That's very, very interesting because, we'll get to that. Anyways, put a pin in this. We'll come back to this very soon. From the beginning, hospitals were big business. In 1889, the California legislature passed a bill to open an insane asylum in Southern California. Governor Robert Waterman was lauded by many for leading the charge to finally deal with the state's booming, burgeoning mental health crises. But some, including the Los Angeles Times, said that Waterman's real goal was more mercenary. Waterman and his cronies had numerous holdings in San Bernardino County, and unsurprisingly, the board in charge of choosing a site was stacked in their favor. Much to the competing counties' chagrin, a 300-plus acre tract in the San Bernardino hamlet of Highland was purchased for the asylum. With the purchase came huge government contracts and ample opportunities for people in the small ranching community. In October of 1890, a cornerstone laying ceremony was held, capped off by, quote, the most elaborate banquet ever spread in San Bernardino County. Okay. So, somewhere around here, it said the corner laying ceremony was in December, if I recall. They laid the cornerstone of the original building on December 15th, 1890. So, whether it was October or December, doesn't really matter too much to me, but the most eloquent banquet ever spread in San Bernardino County. Interesting. Construction soon began on the first wing of a massive red brick asylum. The asylum was built in the fashion of the popular Kirkbride plan, which we've gone over, which called for central administration being flanked by long wards to separate male and female inmates. Gardens and walking paths surrounded the complex, which was forever being added onto, so that those could take exercise and fresh air. My goodness, gotta lock in. So, by the summer of 1893, around 100 patients previously held in Northern California hospitals and jails were brought down to the new institution. Dr. M.B. Campbell was the named medical director. The asylum had many names: the Insane Asylum, Southern California Asylum for the Insane and Inebriate, blah, 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 blah. From the start, a wide variety of unfortunate souls were essentially incarcerated in the facility as wards of the state. Interesting. These individuals had been adjudged insane by state-appointed lunacy commissioners. So the government is just coming up with commissions to decide that this person is insane. The diverse group of inmates at Highland included alcoholics, drug addicts, violent delusional criminals, and epileptics. There was also those with mental and genetic disorders such as Down syndrome, autism, schizophrenia, and dementia. Many, including a woman named Jessie Butler, came to the asylum via the crazy cell in local jails. Okay. There's a bunch of testimonials and stuff, but for the sake of the video, we got to keep it moving. By 1913, Patton was home to almost 2,000 wards of the state, now known as patients instead of inmates. In only 20 years, this isolated fortress had become transformed into a bustling town of the mentally ill and emotionally infirm. Every one of these people had a history to add to the Book of Patton. There were many more chapters yet to be written. This is all that remains of Patton State Hospital today, is this very small little red brick building that you can find just outside of the parking lot. And this is where I was at. This is actually the History Museum, I believe, or it's right next to the History Museum at Patton that I went to. But yeah, that's enough with these articles. So put a linchpin in all those things, because we're going to come back to it. Let's see. So this was the justification that was given for Patton State Hospital, as summed up from this excerpt in, quote, "The Institutional Care of the Insane in the United States and Canada." This was a book that was written, I believe, in the early 1900s, which we'll get to later. I have some passages from later in that we'll be running through, but for the sake of this, quote, "In 1890, the population of the territory comprising the counties of Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, San Diego, San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura was 217,000, and in 1910, in a lapse of just 2 decades, there was 757,000. In 1889, the state legislature, by act approved March 11th, recognized the necessity for an institution for the insane in California, and the rapid increase in population has more than justified the establishment of the insane." To me, this seems more like a retroactive thing, because they're talking about the population skyrocketing from 1890 to 1910, when the state legislature passed the law before 1890 even. So it seems kind of strange. It seems more like a retroactive explanation for why this was, needed. Although I imagine there probably was some rapid population growth in the years leading up to 1890 as well. Yeah, so in addition, the governor at the time, who we have actually discussed before on this channel in a different video, so I'll link that somewhere on the screen, he had massive holdings in San Bernardino, as we read earlier. Okay, so that's pretty much the gist of the mainstream history of this place, even up to today. So I would like to pivot a little bit and focus on what I would call the occulted history of Patton State Hospital. and when I say occult, it doesn't mean like a cult. Occult just means hidden from mass view. So the essentially hidden history of Patton State Hospital, things that are not publicly talked about, or I guess they are, but just hidden in plain sight a little bit. You know what I mean? So we've covered the mainstream history and laid out the established facts about this place, and now it's time to look at this building with a keener eye and see if the established history holds up to scrutiny. Let's start with some of the photos themselves, shall we? Let's see. So let's start with this building of Patton State Hospital in 1889. No, this was when it was founded. I don't know exactly when this photo was taken, sometime between 1890 and 1900, but after it was built. So things of note. One, the scale of this place. This is an absolutely gargantuan, huge place. I mean, I read somewhere that the government contract supposedly was equal to a total of $1.2 million, which in today's money is about $50 million. So that is a crap ton of money, which I guess would explain it. It's quite interesting. We see, as we get closer to this image, there's all sorts of little spires and architectural, oddities and additions, which to me, they seem a little excessive for the sake of a mental institution. But going by Kirkbride's philosophy of wanting to have a beautiful, ornate architecture, I guess it makes sense. It fits in the bill. But it also will start to contradict some of his philosophies as well, as we'll see later. All the extra ornamentation, spires and everything. And nothing really around. There's no people, no real construction that we can see or anything, just a panorama of the whole building. And this is huge. The whole site, like we said, is hundreds of acres. So let's go to the second photo. And this is a colored photo from the year 1900. So as we can see, this building is made of red bricks, and it has a blue roof, which is interesting because I don't know if it's some type of blue tile or it's a copper roof that has decayed, kind of in the same way that the Statue of Liberty or whatever is blue. As it decays over time, it would turn blue. And the relevance of this is that a lot of old world buildings, essentially like pre-1800s, even in Europe and all over the place, used copper on their roofs. They had these spires and ornate buildings on top, which were made of copper. And if this actually is a copper roof, then in a location like a high dry desert in San Bernardino, it would imply that the roof is at minimum 20 years old, because the rust of the copper takes time. And the more humid and wet the environment is, the faster it rusts. So in a high dry desert, it would be at least 20 years before a copper roof like this would would actually rust and take this blue color on. And the photo is from 1900, so if this is a copper roof, which I'm not saying it is because I don't know for sure, but if this was a copper roof, it wouldn't make sense with the timeline of things. And yeah, this is absolutely beautiful, and I guess that does follow the philosophy of Mr. Kirkbride, but like I said, it also contradicts a lot of other philosophies in his book, which we will get to. This photo, I think, is actually maybe the most important one. This was from a t-shirt, I believe, that I saw, and this has what appears not to be a postcard. This is a postcard. This is a photo. This is a postcard. This is fairly certain it's a photo. Okay. So yeah. This, if you take a keen eye and look at it, you see all these windows along the ground? It looks like it's just popping out of the ground. You know what I mean? It almost looks as if there's a structure underneath that is just popping out of the ground. As you can see, this looks very similar to a European castle that you would see in Germany or something, with these, tall spires and Gothic architecture. And I really just can't get over the fact that all these windows are just popping out of the ground. And it's not even like, they're ground floor. It's more like, if you look at it, the windows are halfway in the ground, which doesn't really make sense from a building philosophy. Why would you have a window that's halfway in the ground? Anywho, let's go back. So yeah, windows are halfway in the ground, and this is also a very common phenomenon that you see across America with other old buildings, is that a lot of the times you'll see windows and things just pretty much coming halfway out of the ground. It's an extremely barren landscape. This there's no real road or anything. Doesn't look like there's much of a garden. Doesn't look like there's anything besides desert, which is pretty much what's around San Bernardino. And it has this strange vanilla sky, which is a very common occurrence in early American photography. and it's very commonly associated with photocompositing, which I would like to take a little tangent to basically say that Photoshop, or photocompositing as they call it, has basically existed since photography itself. In this case, they use the vanilla sky to black out the backgrounds. And you can tell it's a vanilla sky because if you look at pretty much any other picture, you can see all the mountains and stuff in the background of this institution. And these are very whited out skies. So it's very interesting. So yeah, photocompositing has had a long history that predates digital technology, evolving from early photographic experimentation to modern digital artistry. So the practice apparently began in the mid-1800s with pioneers like Oskar Rejlander, who created the 2 ways of life using around 30 separate negatives, a landmark in composite photography. Now, I imagine there's simpler composites from beforehand, but if you can tell, this is a pretty clearly photoshopped photo from 1857 that has all these people composited in, different photo negatives combined as one image. And, you know, the people who are first witnessing cameras, witnessing photography, would have no idea of any of this technology, of course, unless they're very well versed in, you know, the daguerreotypes and the color negatives and all these things. So it's very interesting to note that, you know, photo manipulation has basically existed as long as photography has existed. I think that's something you really need to take into account when you're looking at some of these old photos as well. If you want more of a deep dive on this, search up Vanilla Sky's Old World Photoshop, and you'll find some videos which will probably change your perception of history. Here's another photo composite from around Civil War time. You have all these guys with their heads in their hands, you know, very clearly photoshopped, a funny little thing, but, you know, it's just proof that this has existed forever. So, despite the fact that this is in the 1850s, cameras have existed since the 1820s and 1830s, and they've become quite a bit mainstream by the 1860s and 70s. Absolutely zero photos exist, to my knowledge, of the construction of this building, despite the fact that this was a massive government-funded project costing over $1 million, $1.2 million, which is like $50 million today, and being built well past the time of mainstream camera use. You'd think at some point someone would take a photo, and it's not even just this hospital. There's essentially very few, if any, photos at all of any of the construction of any of these Kirkbride buildings. I even tried to actually email the Patton State Hospital directly to try and inquire about some more photography, some more photos, and they, of course, do not have a photo of the construction. As you can see, hello, thank you for reaching out with your inquiry. My name is blah, blah, blah. I'm the hospital historian. In response to your question, we do not have specific photographs documenting the construction of the Kirkbride building. But, of course, they have photos throughout the history, giving me the rundown, you know. It was architectural principles, Kirkbride, you know, all that stuff. And, yeah, despite all that, I can't really find a single construction photo of any of the Kirkbride buildings. And apparently they do exist in some private archives, state archives, etc. So please, if anyone has like some construction photos of these things, please send them my way so that we can break them down and discuss their validity. I love, you know, being wrong about things and like opening my mind to these things. So if anyone has any private archives or connections to it, but you know, send it my way and we'll try and break it down. Okay, so yeah, we need to go back to that article from up here, you know. Because, yeah. The Grand Lodge, okay, yeah, 1889, construction is approved. The Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons laid the cornerstone of the original building on December 15th, 1890. So at the time, yeah, okay. What is this laying of the cornerstone ceremony we keep hearing about? I asked ChatGPT because I'm too lazy to explain it all. So, what does the laying of the cornerstone represent in Freemasonry and Freemasonic ceremonies, especially surrounding the establishment of new buildings? Essentially, it's a ceremonial act ritualizing the foundation of a structure. It is both symbolic and civic, and Freemasons were frequently invited to conduct cornerstone ceremonies for public buildings, including courthouses, capitals, library monuments, and occasionally hospitals or institutions. In Masonic symbolism, the cornerstone represents the beginning point from which the entire structure is aligned and measured. Because it must be perfectly square and level, it symbolizes the ideal foundation of a virtuous life, the foundation of moral character. Interesting. That sounds a lot like moral treatment, the philosophy that gave rise to these institutions in the first place. Freemasonry uses tools of stonemasons symbolically: the square, morality and honesty, level, equality among people, plumb. Okay, yeah. Let's get to the ceremony itself. So, elements of the cornerstone ceremony. They test the stone Masonic officer, usually a Grand Master, symbolically checks the stone with these three things, and it signifies that the building rests on truth, equality, and moral uprightness. The consecration, they consecrate the cornerstone with a bunch of substances like corn, wine, and oil. They make a time capsule, which they place items beneath it, and it's got some biblical symbolism, like Psalms 118, verse 22. The stone which the builders rejected is become the head of the corner, which is an allegory that they, took up. Oh, this one's interesting. Historical role of Freemasons in cornerstone ceremonies. Let's see. The United States Capitol was a 1793 cornerstone laying ceremony led by George Washington, who was a definite Freemason. Washington Monument had a cornerstone ceremony in 1848, same time period. Statue of Liberty even had its own cornerstone ceremony. As I point out. Why the symbolism appears in the 1800s institutional buildings. Let me go back just a second. So these public buildings had formal cornerstone ceremonies, and it frequently engraved the dates or Masonic symbols. And ceremony symbolized order, progress, and enlightened civilization. That's why we're all dumber than ever. This is why many asylums, hospitals, and universities built in the 19th century have documented cornerstone ceremonies. One detail relevant to Kirkbride asylums. Kirkbride asylums did in fact hold Masonic ceremonies, although they were not universal. For researchers studying these buildings, cornerstone records are sometimes one of the earliest surviving construction documents. Okay, that's enough of that. Let's go back to that next thing from the article. So, San Bernardino is full of those who've turned out from all over California to witness the laying of the cornerstone. There we see it again. The Knights Templar. Okay, let's do a quick rundown for those not in the know. The Knights Templar are a Catholic military order all the way back in the Crusades times, I believe. They were on their way to Jerusalem, and these guys were basically one of the original secret societies, essentially. And even to this day, they obviously still exist, because the Grand Commandery of Knights Templar of California is the state-level governing body of the Knights Templar within California, operating under the National Grand Encampment of Knights Templar of the United States of America. It sees 50 local commanderies, like Los Angeles, and Redlands Masonic Lodge, which is right outside of this. Redlands is right next to the Patton State Hospital. The Knights Templar in California are a Christian-oriented fraternal organization rooted in the history and mythos of the medieval Knights Templar, but they are part of the Yort Rite of Freemasonry. To join, individuals must first be Master Masons in good standing and typically progress through the Royal Arch and Cryptic Masonry degrees, which is basically the further you get into it, you get more knowledge. You have to go through these degrees, essentially. There's actually exactly, as far as I know, 33 degrees of Freemasonry. We're seeing that 33 number again. It's very symbolic. It represents the spine in your vertebrae. You have 33 vertebrae in your spine. Same thing as Jesus, lived 33 years. It's a very important number. State officers, Masons, invited, as we can see, the square and compass, this is their logo. And like I said, the ensemblage was between 8 to 10,000 people. And here's the census for San Bernardino. 1890, population only 4,000. In 1900, 6,000. So at most 6,000, but realistically the population of the city is probably like 4,000, meaning that more than double the population of the entire city came to witness this corner laying ceremony. Why would so many people show up for a single stone to be placed? Does that make any sense? On top of that, there was a total of 5,000 to 6,000 people in the entirety of San Bernardino at this time. Where did they find all the skilled labor for the construction of such a massive establishment? I mean, this is taking some pretty advanced stone masonry. This is no, simple building to build. So it's something we would probably struggle with nowadays. Let's go back to this guy, Robert Waterman. He said this is the proudest day of his life. I mean, okay, this guy's a multimillionaire, governor of California, 7 children and a wife, and yet this cornerstone laying ceremony was the proudest day of his life. Why? I mean, maybe it's the proudest day of his life because he secured a government contract for like $50 million. That would probably make me pretty hyped too. But, or what? And here's a weird tidbit. This guy was actually, Robert Waterman, the governor of California, was really good friends with Brigham Young, who was basically took Mormonism and established it as we know in the U.S. after Joseph Smith, after he had died. Another coincidence, exactly 33 Kirkbride buildings still exist either partially or completely intact. Like I said, that 33 number is an extremely important number to Freemasonry, and usually the number is used very intentionally. And it seems like less of a coincidence when you note the deep ties of this building and all the other buildings to Freemasonry. As we can see, here is a plaque I found just outside of the actual Patton State Hospital, commemorating the centennial, celebrating 100 years of care and treatment. We see mental health, a little San Bernardino County insignia. And what's this? Square and compass with a G in the middle. That is, in fact, a Freemasonic square and compass. As we can see here, square and compasses, symbol of Freemasonry and other fraternal bodies. With a G. Yep. In many English-speaking countries, these square and compasses are depicted with the letter G in the center. This has multiple meanings, representing different words depending on the context in which it is discussed. Now, when it says that, what it really means is, as you get further and further in Freemasonry, what they tell you the G means actually changes over time. For beginners, it means God, I know that it stands for geometry. Geometry and Freemasonry are synonymous with the most noblest of sciences, and the basis upon which the superstructure of Freemasonry and everything in existence of the entire universe is erected. Sometimes it even means grand architect of the universe, which basically means God, but as you get further and further, they actually, I believe, reveal to you that the G stands for Gnosis. And Gnosis is a term basically meaning spiritual knowledge or insight into humanity's real nature as divine, leading to the deliverance of the divine spark within humanity from the constraints of earthly existence. I'm trying not to get on too much of a tangent here, but I think it's important that you all kind of at least understand the philosophy that these people believe. Gnosticism. So this is a line-faced serpentine deity found on a Gnostic gem. This basically is depicting the demiurge. And who is the demiurge? Well, we'll get to that. So Gnosticism originated in the late 1st century CE as non-rabbinical Judaism and developed further within early Christianity. In the early years of Christianity, various sectarian groups labeled Gnostics by their opponents emphasized salvation by secret knowledge, or gnosis, which is essentially knowledge or communion with the divine, or becoming in tune or in the nature of the divine. Salvation of gnosis over faith, which is pistis, or grace, gratia, in the teachings and traditions of various communities of Christians. Gnosticism presents a distinction between the highest unknowable God and the demiurge, the creator of the material universe. The Gnostics consider the most essential part of the process of salvation to be this esoteric knowledge, in contrast to God's grace as an outlook in their worldview, along with faith in the ecclesiastical authority. So basically, rejecting the church and God's grace as the salvation. In Gnosticism, the biblical serpent in the Garden of Eden was praised and thanked for bringing knowledge, gnosis, to Adam and Eve, and thereby freeing them from the malevolent demiurge's control. The Gnostic Christian doctrines rely on a dualistic cosmology that implies the internal conflict between good and evil, and a conception of the serpent as a liberating savior and the bestower of knowledge to humankind, as opposed to the demiurge or creator god identified with the Hebrew God of the Old Testament. So Gnostic Christians consider the Hebrew God of the Old Testament as the evil, false God and creator of the material universe, and the unknown God of the Gospel, the Father of Jesus Christ, and the creator of the spiritual world, as the true good God. In the Archonic, Sethian, and Ophite systems, Yaldabaoth, or Yahweh, is referred and regarded as the malevolent demiurge or false god in the Old Testament who generated the material universe and keeps souls trapped in physical bodies, imprisoned in the world of pain and suffering that he created. So that's pretty much a crash course on Gnosticism. You always have to take Wikipedia and all this stuff with a bit of a grain of salt, but that should give you a decent enough introduction to the concept. I looked up, do Freemasons believe in Gnosticism? Again, AI summary, take it with a grain of salt, but Freemasonry does not require or teach a belief in Gnosticism, but there's significant philosophical symbolic parallels between the two. Freemasonry is a non-religious fraternal organization that welcomes all men of all faiths who believe in a supreme being. It does not promote any specific religion, including Gnosticism, but as stated by the Grand Lodge of Canada, Gnosticism is a religion, Freemasonry is not. Despite the official non-religious stance, many scholars and observers note that Freemasonry shares core themes with Gnosticism, such as the pursuit of hidden knowledge, gnosis, like I said, that's at the G, a journey from darkness to light, the idea of a divine spark within individuals, and the symbolic rejection of the material world. The G in Masonic symbol, or the square and compass, is often interpreted as representing gnosis or grand architect, with the former being a key concept in Gnostic thought. The connection is often traced through teachings of esoteric traditions such as Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, and the alleged teachings of the Knights Templar. Figures like Albert Pike, a prominent 19th century Mason, wrote extensively about how the esoteric and Gnostic nature of Masonic teachings, stating that this religion is Gnostic, and that Freemasonry is the soul and marrow of Gnosticism, and Masonry is the soul and marrow of Gnosticism. However, these views are considered part of the esoteric higher degree teachings and are not the standard doctrine for all Masons. So if you're a lower level Mason, you're not going to get this knowledge. But if you're in the know, you'll understand that this is very Gnostic in nature. Some critics, particularly from a Christian perspective, argue that Freemasonry is fundamentally a Gnostic religion disguised as a fraternity, citing oaths and rituals as evidence of hidden Luciferian doctrine. These claims are widely disputed by Masonic authorities, who maintain that the organization is not irreligious, and such interpretations are misrepresentations. So I'll let you come to your own conclusion about that. But just for even more, this is a actual Freemasonic website, Masonic history about Gnosticism. This goes on for a while. If y'all want me to cover this in more depth, please let me know. But essentially, there's a lot of symbolic overlap between Masonic beliefs and Gnostic beliefs. So if you guys want a deeper dive on this, let me know. I'll take some time to go into it in depth, but we gotta get back to the video. Okay. So, from Kirkbride's book, and the hypocrisy of this building. So, we talked about it before, the construction of organization and general arrangement of hospitals for the insane of 1854. This was written more than 30 years before Patent State Hospital. Almost 40 years, actually. So, let's take a look, shall we? No better proof need be given than the necessity of improvements in the construction and arrangements of hospitals for the insane than the simple fact that some of the very last which have been put up exhibit in many parts most glaring defects, and that nearly all erected till within a very few years, have required extensive and costly alterations and additions. Or, if these changes have not been made, the buildings still remain unsuited for the proper and convenient treatment of patients. Now this paragraph, this says a lot without saying a lot. Think about this. Entertain this thought for me for a second. This book came out in 1854. The first Kirkbride Hospital was built in 1848. So there's only been 6 years, like I said right here. First Kirkbride building was only built 6 years prior to the writing of this book. Why is there such a need for extensive and costly alterations and additions already? It's only been 6 years, and these are massive infrastructure projects. Are they really that decrepit after only 6 years? It literally says many of these lamentable defects, which often can scarcely be remedied without rebuilding the hospital. And the large expenditures of money in making alterations and improvements have often resulted almost entirely from the buildings having been planned by persons who, whatever may have been their taste, architectural skill, or good intentions, had no knowledge of what is required for the proper care and treatment of the insane. Okay, so it literally says, these lamentable defects, which can scarcely be remedied without actually rebuilding the hospital and large expenditures of money. There have only been maybe 10 hospitals or something, maybe 10 something hospitals at this point, and they're all less than 10 years old. Why do you need to rebuild the whole hospital? Why is there so many defects and need of alterations and improvements to these massive buildings if they've only been built in the last 6 years? That doesn't really make sense. On top of that, it says here that this is because almost entirely from the buildings being planned by people, however their architectural skill is and good intentions, had no knowledge of what is required for the proper care and treatment of the insane. So essentially, these buildings were not originally built with the intention of becoming a mental institution, is what it's saying. It's saying that all these buildings were built by someone who has no idea anything about the treatment of the insane, despite the fact that, well, this was pushed originally for the treatment of the insane, and there's a pretty big coordinated effort, as we'll see later. It doesn't really make much sense that the people who built these buildings and had massive architectural skill had no idea how to treat the insane, or at least they, at no point during their construction was someone like, yo, this is not working for what we need, Oh, but it continues. No reasonable person at the present day, when planning a hospital for the insane, would think it necessary or desirable to propose a building entirely original in its design, for such a structure could hardly fail to lose in usefulness what it has gained in novelty. Okay, so this guy wants to make super beautiful, ornate, giant buildings, but he doesn't want them to be unique in their design, and their uniqueness would be more of a novelty than useful. Okay. Instead of something entirely new, the object should rather be to profit by the experience of the past, by the knowledge of those who had practical familiarity with the wants and requirements of the insane. Okay, so it's interesting how all of these buildings were erected in so few years. How did they mobilize construction so quickly from one lady in the Senate of a state capitol building to building dozens of mental institutions within the span of 8 years at this point, as opposed to when this started versus when this book was written? Was it really that massive of a necessity to have all these insane asylums be made so quickly? The said defects were caused by the buildings being planned by people who, whatever their taste and architectural skill, had no knowledge of what is requirement for treatment of the insane. Who built the buildings then? I thought that Kirkbride was closely entrenched in the medical and insane asylum establishment. I mean, this guy was there doing the insane asylum in an insane asylum hospital 4 years before Dorothea Dix even made her first speech. This guy, and in the same year of that speech, a massive American continent-wide organization was formed, which I'll get to proof for that later. These ornate buildings, which only have been supposedly built for less than 10 years, people didn't know anything about treating the mentally ill, so why was it originally built then? And as a matter of fact, if novelty is such a redundant thing, why is there so much variation in these? They have a very similar overall design philosophy, and obviously they have different architects supposedly for each one, but why are they so different in their designs? These are all quite unique and quite different. Despite sharing an architectural similarity, it seems kind of redundant to have unique buildings, no? That's what he said verbatim, essentially. And there's more. These institutions, especially when put up under state authority, while having a plain but still good and agreeable style of architecture, should not involve too large of an expenditure of money in their erection. These are very plain buildings, huh? And very good and agreeable and simple. Well, I think they are very good and agreeable and beautiful even, but should not involve too large of an expenditure of money in their erection. These are absolutely gargantuan buildings, and this building, the Patton State Hospital, there was a massive government contract, so that doesn't seem very economical at all. But nevertheless, should be so conveniently arranged as to be economical in their subsequent management, and should have every possible advantage for the best kind of classification and supervision of their patients. That's a nice concept. That's a nice theory. As we've seen, Patton State Hospital didn't really agree and live up to this guy's idealist philosophies as far as treating the mentally ill. Okay. Plain and agreeable architecture should not involve too large expenditure of money in their building. Massive government contracts, over-the-top architecture. And yet, we find the same architectural style in buildings built before this book was released, while this book was released, and even after this book was released. All of them include the same very similar architectural design philosophy, even before this Kirkbride plan really became fully established. Let's look at some examples, shall we? This is the Hudson River State Hospital in 1871. This is a Kirkbride building, and as you can see, more windows sticking out of the ground. It looks like a totally different type of brick architecture, even, on the floor level. Absolutely insane Victorian era looking style building. We see the same blue roofs, so maybe these are just some type of tile or brick. I'm not quite sure. Looks like a whole freaking castle coming out of the ground. And in fact, this place still exists to this day. One of the very few Kirkbride buildings that is actually still exists. But definitely was not economical to build this. This is extremely over the top. And, it begs the question, what would be more economical? Building an entirely new building like this from scratch, something so insane and intricate. Or imagine how economical it would be if this building had, let's just say it already existed and was simply repurposed. That would be very economical to have a massive building already built and to reuse it for a mental asylum. And remember, this was built in 1871 and we still don't have any construction photos. You can find pretty clear photos of, major American cities back in the 1840s, 1850s, as we'll go over later. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, here's another passage from this book. This association, formed in 1844, this is the AMSA II, and holding annual sessions in different parts of the country, has visited and carefully inspected a large number of institutions, and has among its members the chief medical officers of nearly every respectable institution for the insane on the continent. So like I said, this is a continent-wide group of the most chief medical officers in every respectable institution. And for the last, 10 years or so, they have visited and carefully inspected a large number of institutions. Visited and carefully inspected since 1844. The first hospital was built in 1848. So what? They're inspecting institutions. When it says institution, it implies that this is already something that exists. They are looking at places as prospects for institutions rather than potential building sites, is what it, contextually in text, it's what it seems like. Pardon me if I'm wrong, but that's how I'm perceiving it. A series of 26 proposals or propositions in reference to the construction of hospitals for the insane adopted by the association at its meeting in Philadelphia in 1851 have already been recognized as authority by the general and several of state governments. So this was started in 1844, and by 1851 they're already deeply entwined with various state governments, corporate bodies, and authority all around the country, most likely at a national level even, as we see, and various corporate bodies invested in the welfare of those laboring under mental disease. Why are corporations so invested in this? Why would they care? The plan proposed in the present essay is intended to be in every respect fully in accordance with the express views of the association, as shown in the propositions just referenced in reference to the construction, and also with the subsequent adopted at the meeting in Baltimore in 1853 in reference to the organization, both of which series will be founded in the appendix. Okay. Again, none of this really talks about building anything. This is all talking about proposed sites where we can essentially, inhabit institutions that perhaps already exist. Here's some more backstory for this AMSA II institution. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, during October of 1844, Kirkbride helped found the Association of Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane. He held the position of secretary for 7 years, treasurer, vice president for 2 years, and president for 8 years between 1862 and 1870. So this whole time, this guy was deeply entrenched with the entire system. Kirkbride pioneered what would be known as the Kirkbride Plan. Okay. Yeah, like I said, carefully inspected a number of institutions, not sites to potentially build, but actual institutions, as in built structures repurposed as mental asylums. Yeah, heavily collaborated effort, superior to those formerly erected. Must be a pretty important institution to, within 7 years, go from non-existing to having 26 proposals for insane asylums. It transformed pretty quickly from one person, one reformer, preaching in a state assembly to a full continent-wide group institution with millions in government funding within 10 years. Here's another book we slightly touched on earlier, The Institutional Care of the Insane in the United States and Canada from 1916. There's a link right here. We're just going to go over a few more of these excerpts. So, at the meeting of the American Mediophysiological Association in Baltimore, this guy had a presidential address, which was received in the following year. At the meeting of the association in St. Louis, a paper was presented from a Dr. J.W. Babcock of Columbus, who was absent, wasn't there. It was entitled, quote, "A History of the Insane in America. Shall the association have one prepared?" Unfortunately, no copy of this paper can be found, nor any record of it. However, no record was made. It is evident that the committee was created and appointed because in the following year, Dr. Babcock recommended that the whole committee appointed the previous year be dropped and that the whole matter be referred to the council with power to act. In the discussion which followed, appropriate reference was made to philanthropic work of those who had labored to develop insane hospitals in different sections of the country. Now, when we talk about philanthropic work, what this really means is it's talking about the robber barons, the Freemasons, the elites of society at the time, basically using their wealth to fund these insane asylums in different sections of the country. And giving appropriate reference means basically, when we write the history of this, we got to glaze these guys, you know what I mean? So, and the consensus of the opinion was general that the council of the association should take charge in preparation and publication of an adequate account of their work on behalf of the insane during previous century and accompanying biographical sketches of the men who had been concerned in the movement. So basically 1897, they had already built pretty much every single Kirkbride hospital, save for maybe one or two. They decide, guys, we need to make up a history of all this stuff and give proper reference to the philanthropic work of those who've worked so hard to build these insane asylums. It is also agreed that the council should employ a historian to compile whatever material was obtained for such history. These suggestions were adopted, and the council was empowered to employ a historian and to do everything required to advance the work. But basically, this project got canned for a little while, but let's break it down a little bit. Not long after the building of PSH, a guy who wasn't even there suggests we should make the history with no paper copy, created a committee, ousted the last committee, and made reference to the elites who labored to make these insane asylums all around the country, and employed a historian. The history of every single one of these institutions was strictly collaborated on in, quote, every section of the United States and Canada, as we're about to read. In the summer of 1911, a systemic effort was made to interest all members of the association in the project to secure from every section of the United States and Canada adequate cooperation in the effort to collect historical material. It makes some reference to the Utica State Hospital, and that place is pretty crazy. Where are we? This is the Utica State Hospital in New York, as you can see. Here's a building of it in the modern times, and it was partially destroyed in 2015. Of course, pretty much all these places are destroyed. It also makes reference to the Pennsylvania Hospital for the Insane. This is where Kirkbride was working in 1840, prior to his work for the Kirkbride plan, which is a nice little institution. Got the same kind of, almost looks like a Capitol building with these spires and such. Here's another little excerpt. The obligations of the committee to the individual superintendents of nearly 200 institutions in the United States and Canada are very great. In fact, without their cooperation, it would have been impractical to prepare any adequate history of the movements in various states and provinces. This is just more proof of how deep the collaboration is. There's more than 200 institutions, and the individual superintendents of each and every one has been punched, you know what I mean? So this is a very deeply collaborated effort. And frankly, this insanity is not just in America in the 1800s, it's actually all over the world. Let's read this from the wiki page about lunatic asylums. The modern era of institutionalized provision for care of mentally ill began in the early 19th century with a large state-led effort. Public mental asylums were established in Britain after the County Asylums Act. This empowered magistrates to build rate-supported asylums in every county to house the pauper lunatics. 9 counties first applied, and the first public asylum was opened in 1811 in Nottinghamshire. That would be this building right here. And of course it was demolished, because why not? And let's see. Parliamentary committees were established to investigate abuses at madhouses like the Bethlehem Hospital, which has existed since, like I said, all the way back in 1247. Weirdly enough, again, this place was moved to different places, and this is the most intricate one in 1676 when it was supposedly built, and at Moor Fields, which is very interesting. Why are they making reference to the Moors, as in the Moorish people in the UK of all places? Strange. Lunacy Act of 1845 basically changed the status of mentally ill people to patients who required treatment, and the first Lunacy Commission was formed in France, 1838, same time period. Regulations in the admissions of asylums across the country. United States, the first law began in New York, which is what caused the Utica State Hospital to be opened in 1850, I guess. Creation of this hospital and many others was tied to Dorothea Dix, and whose philanthropic efforts extended over many states and in Europe as far as Constantinople. Many state hospitals in the United States have, Kirkbride plan. Yeah, we've been through this. Okay, so this next section of occulted history, I'm going to have to give huge credit to the YouTuber Mind Unveiled for this section. I took a lot of reference from their video, which will be in the description for those wanting a much deeper dive, and I warn you, only if you're ready, for your worldview to be challenged a little bit, I would recommend watching this video. But anyways, so this is the very first insane asylum in the U.S. This is the 1773 Eastern State Hospital in Virginia. Again, we see very similar signs of it just popping out of the ground. a much less sophisticated work of art, but still shows these spires, the similar architecture, the laid out wings, those widespread wings that we see in later Kirkbride buildings. But definitely still appears to have this old world flair to it. And of course, conveniently, this conveniently burned down in 1885, and it was built apparently in 2 years. It was established in 1771, and the first patient was admitted in 1773, Williamsburg, Virginia. Here's the second asylum in the U.S. This is the Maryland Hospital for the Insane at Spring Grove. This is a picture from the 1870s, but it was founded as a hospital all the way back in 1797. But this has a pretty crazy backstory. So, although Spring Grove formally founded as a hospital in 1797, it can actually trace its roots back to a predecessor institution that began similarly 3 years earlier, in 1794, during the second presidential term of George Washington. Again, Freemason. In that year, a small group of men, headed a sea captain named Jeremiah Yellett, established what they called a retreat for the ailing mariners in Baltimore. This retreat, the term retreat had been used in England and America to describe what today might be called sanitariums or infirmaries. In 1794 Baltimore, which would not be incorporated as a city for another 3 years, it was growing rapidly and had a bustling seaport. Accordingly, there was an increasing demand for respite care of infirm seafarers that were regularly arriving at the harbor. Not much information exists today about Captain Yellett's retreat. In fact, there's some dispute about its actual name. Some people just call it the retreat. Some people call it Hospital for Strangers and Mariners, seamen strangers, blah, blah, blah. We do know it was now on a defunct byway known as the Old Road to Philadelphia, later referred to, funny enough, as the Old Joppa Road. Can't make this shit up, guys. Cannot make this shit up. Just south of today's Monument Street in Baltimore. And this is actually the location of Johns Hopkins Hospital today, which is pretty crazy to think about. Before Baltimore was even incorporated as a city, this building basically existed as a retreat to treat sick sailors, but it was funded by a private men's club and Jeremiah Yellett. So that's interesting. It started not as a insane asylum at all, really. I mean, sure, I guess you could technically call it that if you consider sick sailors as insane. Here's some more context. Spring Grove State Hospital. As one of the oldest psychiatric hospitals established in the United States, Spring Grove has a long history. It was originally founded in Baltimore by a group of citizens led by one Captain Jeremiah Yellett. Simply known as the Retreat, it was a private hospital for ailing sailors. 3 years later, Yellett and his associates required assistance from the Maryland state government for expanding the hospital. The state consented, and the hospital continued to grow, eventually becoming a completely state-operated institution in 1834 and exclusively treating mental illness by 1839. Okay, so seems relatively normal, but we continue. In 1808, the state has taken over of the building and does $40,000, which is about $1 million today, in repairs. And apparently, they got this money from a bunch of lottery winners who returned their winnings back to the state. Have you ever heard of a single person in the history of ever returning their damn lottery winnings to the state? Especially $1 million? Come on. On December 24th, 1808, Maryland's legislative body passed an act authorized the lottery to raise the sums of up to $40,000 for the improvement and expansion of existing hospital building. By all accounts, the lottery was very successful, and at least one historian has noted that a number of the lottery winners donated their winnings back to the state so that they could be applied to the expansion of the hospital. What a bunch of stand-up gentlemen, Stand-up chums. The sum of $500 was appropriated by the city council. Okay. Maybe it wasn't that much. I don't know. Either way, who does that, bro? That just does not make sense. In 1812, again, War of 1812, right there, the treasurer of Western Shore was directly paid $5,000 annually for 3 years for the completion of several buildings that were already in progress. Spring Grove during the War of 1812. The War of 1812. We keep coming back to this. It's a very important thing that I don't really know if I even have time to fully get into right now, but I'll try. In addition to treating indignant Maryland citizens and strangers, i.e. people without family or friends, the hospital also continued to treat the sick and disabled for a number of years. In 1814, during the War of 1812, a bunch of sick soldiers were taken from the hospital. That seems normal. Repurpose the hospital for hospital needs during a war. That seems normal enough. In addition, yellow fever patients were treated at the hospital during the several epidemics of 1798 and 1819. That is weird. I heard that this yellow fever epidemic also caused a lot of insanity, which is probably has somewhere fitting in this story that I'm not quite sure where yet. During the epidemic of 1819, 145 yellow fever victims, quote-unquote, were admitted to the city hospital, 85 of whom died. Damn. In 1813, admission to the city hospital, this is where it gets very interesting, admission to Spring Grove, essentially, could be ordered and authorized by the chancellor of an entity known as a chancery court. As the head of a chancery court, the chancellor had the authority to commit to the facility those individuals who were referred to in the law as any lunatic, idiot, or person insane. So during the War of 1812, they made a court where essentially they can lock up anyone they want as an idiot or a lunatic or whatever, for whatever the reason they want, in the middle of a war. By 1815, the hospital was sometimes referred to as the hospital in the vicinity of Baltimore. Okay, whatever. So within 10 years, it goes from this little private men's retreat to a state-owned and funded mental institution which begins locking up people during war for essentially any pretext due to them being insane. Okay. Who defines insane? The state? Why would there be such an urgent need to lock up citizens who are insane in the middle of a war? Could anyone, could they just put anyone they deem crazy in an institution for any reason? Maybe this is why so many Kirkbrides suddenly appeared. But yeah, essentially Spring Grove, it still exists today, but the Kirkbride building was demolished in 1963. Shocker. Okay, this is crazy though. I'm going to open this up in a new tab. This is basically a logbook for the one of the West Virginia state hospitals we saw earlier. And this is basically the reasons for admission between 1864 to 1889. And some of these are just like, this is just proof essentially they could find any reason they wanted to send you into the mental institution. Intemperance and business trouble, kicked in the head by a horse, hereditary predisposition, ill treatment by husband, imaginary female trouble, hysteria, immoral life, imprisonment, jealousy and religion, laziness, marriage of son, masturbation and syphilis, masturbation for 30 years, medicine to prevent conception, so taking birth control, menstruation deranged, mental excitement, bro, so you're too smart, they'll throw you in there, dead ass, novel reading books you're not supposed to, nymphomania, opium habit, overaction of the mind, again, too smart, overstudying of religions, too smart, overtaxing mental powers. What? Like, if you're smart and well-read and versed and you oppose the state, they're throwing you in an insane asylum. Parents were cousins. Okay. Periodical fits. You get mad every once in a while. Tobacco and masturbation, again. Political excitement. Politics. So they could just throw you in there for politics. They're just saying it straight up. Religious enthusiasm. Fever and loss of lawsuit. Fits and desertion of husband. Asthma. So if you can't breathe, you're crazy. Bad company. You got bad friends. Bad habits. Political excitement. Bad whiskey. Blood flux. Brain fever. Business nerve. Carbonic acid gas. Congestion of the brain. Death of sons in war. Decoyed into the army. Desertion by husband. Dissolute habits. Domestic affliction. Domestic trouble. Dropsy. Egotism. I mean, the war. Literally just the war, bro. They could just throw you in because of the war. Suppression of menses. Suppressed masturbate. So if you're masturbating or you're not masturbating, they can throw you in there. Like, what is going on here? Uterine derangement. Like, grief. Your homie died, so you're throwing in a mental institution. Female disease. Oh my god. Fell from horse in war. This is some feebleness of intellect. Like, what are we doing here? This is basically, I would say this is some proof showing that these buildings are not as altruistic as it seems. This is, like, what the hell is snuff eating for 2 years? Like, what are we doing here? They're just finding any reason they can to throw people in these institutions. I digress. It's kind of terrifying to read. They can just make up any freaking reason they want. And yeah, maybe these institutions aren't so altruistic as in Kirkbride's original vision as he wrote in his book. Let's go through some other asylums, shall we? This is in Canada, the Kingston Provincial Asylum in 1870. The backstory to this one just blew my fucking mind, honestly. So during the mid-1800s, before the construction of the Rockwood Asylum for the criminally insane, Kingston Penitentiary, which is a jail, was overrun with mentally ill and criminally insane inmates. To solve this problem, the Rockwood Criminal Lunatic Asylum was built on the shores of Lake Ontario, close to the penitentiary, and built by the prisoners themselves. What? Construction began in 1859, and although it was not completed until 1870, men began to occupy portions of the building as early as 1862, females admitted later. Okay. So you have these prison inmates who are supposedly mentally insane, having them build their own prisons? That sounds very similar to the prison labor system we find in today, especially in California and other states, like especially in the South, 14th Amendment being all BS and shit, like not actually abolishing slavery, but abolishing slavery unless it's a punishment as being thrown in jail. So they can find you crazy or throw you in jail for any reason and then make you a laborer and build your own prison. That's crazy. Convicts in the penitentiary become insane while under sentence there. Oh, right. Sorry. Let me explain. This is basically context as to why people would be thrown into this insane asylum, this Kingston asylum. So, 1. Convicts in the penitentiary become insane under sentence. Certain classes of lunatics committed to jail as lunatics dangerous to be at large. Okay. Persons committed with some kind of offense of which they had been acquitted on the ground that they were insane at the time, so pleading insane. Or persons indicted for any offense and upon arraignment thereof found by a jury, especially impaneled for the purpose to be insane. So if you get thrown in jail for any reason and then the jury decides you're insane, they'll throw you in there for that too. And they got some humiliation rituals and shit going on here. Let's open this up on a new tab. Patients wore distinctive canvas uniforms bearing the word lunatic in all caps. The medical goal in the 1800s was not to cure criminal lunatics, but rather to calm them. Chloral hydrate and alcohol were used to pacify patients, and they were often bled. Dr. Litchfield, the only physician at Rockwood at the time, had a simple treatment plan that relied on a pretty free use of alcohol by day and sedative by night. Treatments also included restraints, blistering, leeching, enemas, and bloodletting. It has been reported that during this period, physicians have also performed some of the first neurosurgical procedures, lobotomies, on patients at Rockwood, using trephines to drill into people's skulls. We saw how disgusting that was earlier in one of those depictions from the 1500s. Criminal lunatics were not the sole inhabitants of the asylum. The staff lived on site, and the residents were also admitted. The population included patients up and down the spectrum, as well as lepers and promiscuous women. So even if you just like to get around, they'll still throw you in the damn asylum. Fuck. Okay. So yeah, we're supposed to supposedly believe that the inmates who are insane built their own lunatic asylum on the shores of Lake Ontario due to the jail being so overrun with mentally ill people. I mean, yeah. And also, we see the same phenomenon, windows underground. And again, how are these inmates able to build such beautiful, intricate architecture? These are not architects, these are insane people, supposedly. Like, it just does not make sense. Here's another one. Toronto Provincial Lunatic Asylum. This was in Toronto, Canada. Central to the ongoing Queen Street redevelopment is a poignant reminder of the facility's past. A heritage wall, parts of which date back to 1852, built in stages using unpaid labor by asylum patients, which was considered to be part of their treatment. So they would lock people up and use building their own prison as a form of unpaid labor as part of their treatment. Oh, guys, it'll help cure their mental illness. Give them some good labor in. Come on, bro. Are we being dead ass right now? Okay, Traverse City, Michigan. This one is freaking crazy. Look at the size of this institution. This is actually bigger than the Kirkbride in Patton. This is freaking huge. Traverse City, Michigan. You've probably never even heard of this city. Guess why? Because even today, there's only 15,000 people. When this was built in 1880, the population of the city was 1,897. Less than 2,000 people. And yet there was not only a need for an institution like this, but the manpower, skilled architects, stonemasonry, and funding to build an institution like this in 1880. Okay, let's keep it moving. What else is to be said about that? This one is even crazier. Napa State Hospital. This was founded 1872. Look at this. This is a whole freaking city. This looks like downtown London. You know what I mean? You got like huge fields here, insanely massive architecture here. I mean, this is just unbelievably beautiful. And this is in Napa. Napa, again, you might not know where this is. Because, again, the population today is not even 80,000 people. And the population in 1870 was less than 2,000. In 1880, it was less than 4,000. Still. This is a 192-acre facility. Let's read it. Napa State Hospital. Situated on 192 acres of Rancho Tilcate land purchased from Don Juarez, this hospital opened its doors in 1875. So, founded 1872, opened 1875. 3 years seems to be always the time span for these institutions, relatively. The central building was constructed of native stone and millions of bricks made on site. So it was made on site, the bricks. That's crazy. Over the years, the property eventually increased to a total of 2,062 acres to supply fruits, vegetables, poultry, meat, dairy products to the largely self-supported hospital. Streams to the east were dammed to provide a basis of water system. The building survived the Great Earthquake of 1906. And keep in mind, Napa is very close to San Francisco, and when there was that massive earthquake, obviously it destroyed a lot of places in Napa too, but it actually survived this. meaning it was a very, sturdy, well-made institution, and probably survived many more earthquakes in the past. It only got minor damage. The castle, as it's called, the most imposing building ever constructed in the Napa Valley, was torn down in the 1940s, but the institution continues to serve those in need. The plaque was dedicated in 1996, and this is what it looked like in color. I mean, this is just an unbelievably beautiful institution. Wild. Again, population 2,000 people. Here's another one. State Asylum for the Insane at Morristown, New Jersey. Again, we see some signs of it coming out of the ground. Morristown, New Jersey, 1871. This is actually the biggest one I've seen yet. This is freaking massive. It literally looks like an entire city. Like, again, coming out of the ground, you can see. 1871. Again, photography was around at the time. I understand it's cheaper to make a perspective like this, but yeah, crazy. Finally, this is the last example I have right now. You can look up so many examples of these buildings. Like, I'm just scratching the surface, but this is the Anamosa State Penitentiary. So again, not really a Kirkbride building, but I mean, look at this. This looks like it's straight out of Austria, like the House of Windsor. You know what I mean? This is like some medieval castle. And this is in the middle of Iowa. And the population was 2,000. In fact, the population didn't change at all. Not a single person changed, between the decade. So it's not like they imported, new architects or anything. Okay, so yeah, we went through all this stuff. Went through all this stuff over here. So, before we get to our final conclusion, I would like to add this bonus history of San Bernardino itself, because this actually, when I was researching this right before I started filming, I had some revelations as well. So, San Bernardino itself, the city where the Patton State Hospital was built, it supposedly started back in 1810 when this guy, Francisco Dumetz, basically moved from a different mission, San Gabriel, to start his own mission in San Bernardino in 1819. Fast forward a couple years to 1851, and a bunch of 500 Mormons actually arrive in the valley, and they create this little community called Little Creek. And they bought 35,000 acres of land to expand Brigham Young's religious empire, as they say. And like we said before, Governor Waterman was actually very good friends with Brigham Young. And they created Fort San Bernardino, which is not exactly a crazy place, but whatever. So San Bernardino was incorporated 3 years later in 1854, and there was only 1,200 residents at the time, and 900 of them were Mormon. 1857, Brigham Young, he recalls all the Mormons back to Salt Lake City. They're basically Mecca, and the people who stayed essentially developed the valley. Now, when gold was discovered in Holcomb Valley, which is pretty close to here, there was a huge influx of people for the gold rush, and it temporarily became the most populated city in all of Southern California with a population of 10,000. I don't even know where Holcomb Valley is, so, damn. Just goes to show, pretty crazy. But on the same webpage I was doing all this research, this picture right here might even just blow the lid on this whole thing. So this is a picture from 1891, and this is 9th and E Street. 1891, keep in mind, the corner laying ceremony happened somewhere between October and December of 1890. So at most, this is a year and a couple months removed from the first stone being laid, supposedly. And it's this really nice depiction of the whole E Street and everything. And I thought, 9th and E Street, that sounds really familiar. I remember something like that when I was visiting the institution. And so I look it up on Google Maps, and this is the pin I have dropped for Patton State Hospital, little old world building, PSH, This is the corner of E Street and 9th. So when I looked back at this photo with a much keener eye, I looked right around here, and let me see if I can get my magnifier real quick. If we look, it's very hard to make out right here, but sorry about that. So yeah, I zoomed in here a little bit, and when I look at this from this perspective, you can actually see right over here this outline of what looks like a very big institution right on the hill of these mountains. If we go back all the way up to, the very top of this. Sorry, I'm being slow. Okay, so when we look at this photo, right, you can kind of see these hills in the background in the same way that, when we come down here, we can see the hills in the background just from a different perspective, right? So you scroll down, you look really closely at this. you can see what I can only describe to you as the full building, because this is like, here's the left side of the wing, goes all the way across to the right side of the building. It looks like a whole institution right here on these hills, and it lines up with the hills in the background here. So this picture from 1891, which is maybe at most a year removed from the cornerstone laying ceremony when it was originally founded, it shows the building in its entirety before its completion date in 1893. I don't really think it would take an extra 2 years for them to, go from having the building fully built to, opening the institution. That doesn't really make sense, especially for such a expensive institution, apparently. And in the 1880s, San Bernardino actually became a massive railway hub. So the Santa Fe, Union Pacific, and Southern Pacific Rail all converged here, and the Transcontinental Railroad basically established here, and the population at that time boomed. As you can see, this is not too shabby of a building. It actually pretty similarly has some old world aspects in and of itself. Not quite the same architecture, but still very intricate building with the arches and the domes and the architecture. So my friends, we've gone over a lot. I would like to do a quick synopsis and give you a hypothesis of what I think is really going on here. So let's finally circle back to Patton State Hospital. This is a full picture of the photo I showed you earlier on a I think this is like a sweater or something. As you can see, same thing. Absolutely beautiful. This was also one of the buildings, I believe, at the Kirkbride Institution. At least that's what I found in my research before it was demolished. So yeah, let's recap the official narrative, right? Let's take it all the way back from the top. So this structure, according to mainstream history, was built in 3 years. It was established late in 1890 and opened in 1893. The total population of San Bernardino at the time was, at the very most, 6,000. Probably closer to 4,000, but at most 6,000. The need for the institution was caused by a combination of factors, namely a sharp increase in population, as well as an increase in mental illnesses, mainly due to the wars of 1812, Civil War, and their cascading effects. And it supposedly started as a very altruistic mission to take care of mentally unstable people in the mid-1850s. However, there are more than 2,000 patients buried in a field, which was full by 1930. And after that, when people died and were unclaimed, their bodies were sent to a university for research, as well as committing many medical atrocities such as lobotomies and everything else we've covered. This building followed an architectural style found all across the U.S. in the Kirkbride plan, while simultaneously contradicting many aspects of his book and his plan, including the need for economical structures and non-redundant architecture. It was funded by the governor of California, Robert Waterman. Well, it wasn't funded by him, but he got the government contracts to, build or refurbish this place via shady backroom deals to secure massive government contracts equal to about $50 million. And as a celebration of this essentially highway robbery of tax dollars, he invited the state militia, Knights Templar, Freemasons, state official, and thousands of others to throw the largest banquet in San Bernardino history, which had up to 10,000 people, double the population of the entire city, and hosted a Masonic cornerstone laying ceremony with a Masonic quartet. And this was the governor's proudest day of his entire life. And despite all of this, not a single photo of the construction or even this massive banquet event has surfaced to my knowledge. Again, if I'm wrong, I would love to be wrong. Please share in the comments, share anything you have with me. I would love to reply to it, get back to it, and evaluate my hypothesis further, That's pretty much the mainstream history and the official narrative, and the occulted history. It, meaning Patton State Hospital, along with dozens of other buildings, were founded and established. They use this phrasing pretty much everywhere, even with cities all across America and Canada. They exhibit similar architectural styles, but very different and advanced and sophisticated architecture, similar in design to advanced European or old world architecture that we would see today in places like Milan or Rome or something like that. Crazy stuff. And this, nearly with all the strange, dubious, and downright impossible backstories with little to no proof, and despite the widespread existence and usage of cameras at this time, massive funding budgets for the institution themselves, no real construction photos. And this is all despite the fact that the Kirkbride plan was pretty clear about being economical and efficient. Seems a bit wasteful. That's just me. If I was trying to build rapidly even build insane asylums to take care of people, the aesthetics and advanced stonemasonry, architecture, etc. would be the last thing on my mind, unless, of course, these buildings had already been here and were being repurposed. Entire institution and system appears out of nowhere within 10 years, the AMSA II, and within 10 years it has pretty much continent-wide collaboration to send anyone, to compile the history of insane asylums, erect insane asylums pretty much anywhere in the country, and seemingly send anyone to an asylum for almost any reason, and are on record in their own books stating that they are inspecting and repurposing buildings, essentially, which have already existed, which, actually does make it quite economical when you think about it. When you take this framework, this view of it, it explains why almost all of these buildings needed repairs within the first decade or so of being built, and many were torn down or replaced with smaller structures because it's very expensive to upkeep such massive buildings, such crazy infrastructure. So not only were these not economic anymore, but they potentially held proof of a past, that needed to be destroyed. And how else would they destroy the past than, let's just say anyone who remembered how these buildings got here in the first place, the maybe civilization or group that existed here beforehand, they could very easily be lumped in and thrown in an insane asylum for any reason they wanted and get lobotomized or treated like a lunatic or called crazy if they went against the official narrative of the government or politics or anything really. So anyone going against the government or any official narratives could be thrown in here. And it's not really a coincidence that you see a rise in these institutions around the time of originally the War of 1812 and then followed up by the Civil War. It's quite interesting. So, my hypothesis, there's a few ways you could take this. The first, obviously, you could simply believe in the official narrative of history. There are many historians who've spent a lot of time, compiling facts and data about this. Who's to say that they're wrong? But for me, on a personal level, there are far, far too many holes in the plot of the story, strange coincidences, strange figures, strange connections to secret societies, etc., and frankly unexplainable buildings in history that I just can't compromise and get my head around, and fully accept the mainstream official narrative. Hypothesis 2. Maybe we actually did build these buildings, but they were a lot more malicious than we've been officially told. But, let's say without any proof of their building, in conjunction with the insane architecture and seeming rush to destroy these buildings not long after their erection, Patton State Hospital only existed supposedly for 30 years before it was destroyed. Same thing you can find in a number of other Kirkbrides, how quickly they were destroyed and don't exist today, especially not in their original forms. This makes me but this draws a conclusion in my mind that it is very unlikely that we, as in people in the 1800s, built these. So this draws me to my next conclusion, that these buildings existed here beforehand and were repurposed. And this begs a lot of questions, right? This, in fact, is a rabbit hole all on its own, and this video is going on for way too long, so I'm going to have to, if I really want to get into this, I'm going to have to do a whole other video breaking this down. But let's try and keep it brief. This begs the question, who would have built these buildings, and where did the people who built these buildings go? Were they defeated in war? Were they driven out of cities by some type of cataclysm of some kind? It doesn't really make much sense. It could be tied to the War of 1812 and Civil War, which sometimes are called reset wars, because they kind of reset the landscape of America, for lack of a better term. It could also be related to, I didn't even really put this down, but the year without a summer. I believe this is 1815, Tambora eruption. This year without a summer was essentially something that happened. It wasn't even just a year. Let me actually bring this in. So, the year without a summer. This is in 1816, a volcanic event. Basically, the Tambora volcano in Indonesia erupted. And it was such a massive eruption, it put so much ash into the atmosphere that it caused climate abnormalities and dropped the global temperatures by about 1 degree Fahrenheit. Summer temperatures were the coldest on record from 1766 between 2000. A bunch of crop failures, food shortages, etc., etc. And this was exacerbated by the fact that Europe was still recovering from the Napoleonic Wars, which was also the War of 1812, which is really weird. Anyways, you know, who's to say some cataclysm like this didn't have some impact in, you know, the significant amount of volcanic ash and gases released into the atmosphere blocked sunlight, leading to global cooling. Maybe this has something to do with it. I don't really know exactly. But more questions are to be asked. Why were there so many insanely massive buildings in seemingly middle of nowhere? Like we went over, you know, Iowa, you know, Traverse City, Michigan, Napa, California, places with 2,000 people, barely anyone. I mean, sure, you want to be out in the countryside away from all the people. That, I guess, makes sense, but you find similar architecture near actual cities as well. So, I don't know. Why are some of the buildings in the ground? This is a pretty common theme we saw. Pretty much a majority of the buildings we saw look like they're coming out of the ground. Like there's a sub-basement floor. You know, it's almost like the not even just the foundation. The foundation is underneath the building, which is under the ground. You know what I'm saying? It's not just like the foundation itself. It's the foundation is under the underground, as evidenced by the windows. So this begs the question, is this some type of flood? Is this some type of mud flood, physical, like, you know, flood that covered and buried a lot of these buildings, and these buildings existed beforehand and were only excavated, which would make sense as to how they existed here before. People disappeared, and you find all the evidence of these buildings coming out of the ground and existing already and being decrepit and needing repairs. They've probably existed for a long time and were refound. That's why they say they founded these cities. They established these things. They never really say they built them because, well, maybe they didn't. And it's not a completely unsubstantiated theory. Let's look at the phenomenon of pretty much every major American city going through some type of cataclysmic fire, some type of flood or earthquake or even hurricane, like in Galveston, and then suddenly raising the city level by as much as 6 feet. Let's take a look at this. I mean, let me open this in a new tab. This is crazy stuff. The raising of Chicago. During the 1850s and 60s, same time period, engineers carried out a piecemeal raising of the grade of central Chicago to lift the city out of its low-lying swampy ground. Buildings and sidewalks were raised on jack screws. The work was both funded by private property owners and public funds. So many of the city's old wooden buildings were not considered worth raising. So that instead, the owners of these buildings had them demolished or placed on rollers and moved to the outskirts of the city. Business activities such as buildings continued as they were being moved. So you're telling me they're raising your freaking workplace 6 feet and then you're just clocking into work anyways? It's so strange. Basically, this happened in response to a number of epidemics, including typhoid, dysentery, cholera. It killed 6% of the city's population. So it forced the engineers to do something about it. And it doesn't really say on this, but they actually raised the entire city of Chicago 6 feet. That's like as tall as I am. That's insane to think about. And think about all the institutions and buildings that were buried because of this. Or maybe it was already raised and things were just excavated out. I don't know. You find a very strange phenomenon when you look at the first pictures of American cities. This is Cincinnati in 1848. As we can see, buildings all over, you know? But you find something peculiar. One, there's not really any people. And two, all the streets are full of mud. You know, these are all very undeveloped roads. For how intricately designed and developed these buildings are, you'd think maybe there'd be some kind of simple stone work in the road instead of just mud, you know? This one kind of trips me out. Here's San Francisco in 1848. There's a population of about 400 to 500 people total. And this is 2 years later. This is the oldest photograph of San Francisco that I could find. It's a daguerreotype in 1850. So this is not even 2 years removed. And it's a world of difference. Let's see how they explain this. Despite its attractive location, it was basically a small settlement for most of the time. Its 1847 population was said to be 459. The California Gold Rush brought a flood of treasure seekers. Prospectors accumulated in San Francisco, raising the population from 1,000 in 1848 to 25,000 in December 1849. So in 1 year, 24,000 people, huh? That's pretty wild. The promise of wealth was so strong that people arriving just deserted their ships and just rushed to the gold fields. I mean, I guess you could say that, but it just seems very strange. The whole explanation of the gold rush itself has got some strange history itself that's kind of difficult to wrap your head around. Anyways, here's New York City in 1854. As we see, very well-developed buildings, mud streets. There are people, though. As we can see, this exposure. This is one thing that's characteristic of early photography, is that they had very long exposure times. So anything that was moving would have this really crazy motion blur. So all these horse-drawn carriages and stuff going through the mud streets, you can see the exposure. This exposure time is how they explain away a lot of these cities, early cities, not having any people in their photos. So it's the exposure time, they're blurry. But in reality, you would see them as a blur, not as like a nothing. They just don't exist in these photos. You know what I mean? They just don't exist here. There's no one, like literally no one. So let's fast forward to Denver in the 1880s. Yeah, this is not very long after the city was supposedly established. And we see similar types of architecture here. A massive chapel here on the left, old world-esque. Looks like it's in, out of Europe. All the way over here, similar thing. Absolutely gargantuan building. As we see, fully developed cities. Don't really see anyone walking in the street here. Oh man, this one's a trip. This is Detroit in 1885. This is an absolutely insane building. Yeah, wow. And I also think it's wild that we see these cable cars that are being drawn by horses. It's got wheels. It's got, I would presume there are electric tracks somewhere, but these cable cars are being carried by wheels. You would think if someone, had the time and the engineering expertise to come up with this cable car system, that they would know how to operate these. They would know how to use these. They would know how to use the electric wheels and cable car system to, go back and forth. But instead, it looks like people just found these carts and just made them horse-drawn buggies, despite the fact that they are meant to go on tracks. And this is actually something we can see in other cities if you look, but I could go on. The only explanation I have for this is that the people inhabiting the city just didn't really know what the purpose of this was, didn't know this was a train, didn't know what the purpose of the tracks were, so they just used it as a horse-drawn carriage. This is what I think, and I want you, the viewer, to draw your own conclusions. And if you made it to the end of this video, kudos to you, because I've been ranting for a very long time, and I appreciate you so much for listening, because this stuff took me a really long time to compile all the research and be thorough and try and be as accurate as I can, trying to be diligent about my research and not miss anything, but I'm bound to miss something anyways. But regardless, this is actually what I think. I think there is some kind of massive cover-up going on relating to these insane asylums in America, and really American history at large. These architectural feats are evidence from the past, which has been systemically destroyed and replaced since the 1800s. There's some kind of mass memory loss or amnesia that we all seem to be going through about our true history, and with the revelations we've gotten recently with certain files, if you know what I'm talking about, learning that E's accomplice, her father, the now deceased Robert Maxwell, owned Pergamon Press, which owned McGraw-Hill, which owns every history textbook in America. It starts to be not too surprising that our history's been lied about. And if you want to know what I mean, well, this guy likes her, and this is her dad, and her dad owned this. He was also a triple deep intelligence agent for people, and his dad, her dad, this guy, owned this. Anyone who grew up in America will know exactly what this is. See, Pergamon Press, McGraw-Hill education. This is science to the moon, Every science and history textbook in America pretty much was written by McGraw-Hill for a long time. So that is just fascinating to think about. I'll let you sit with that one, my dear viewer. So yeah, I think there's some kind of massive cover-up going on. I could go into detail about a lot more of these institutions and their own, little nuances and quirks, but that's essentially the gist of the story. So I'm going to be doing in my next video, or the next part of this, series of Occulted Hidden History, we're going to be tackling the World's Fairs and the stunning buildings in California, as we can see right here, most of which have been demolished. Pretty much all the stuff we see here has been demolished. This is San Francisco in 1915. Tower of Jewels, San Francisco, destroyed. All of this, San Francisco, destroyed. Another little view right here in color, I'll open this in a new tab. Look at that, all of that, destroyed. And even in San Diego, all of this stuff, these actually do remain. that's the one cool thing about Balboa Park, is it's one of the few World's Fair sites that did save a lot of their buildings. But anyways, I digress. That's going to be the topic for our next video. Thank you all so much for joining me on this super long-winded expose. I mean, look at this. We've gone all over the place. Yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you've learned something. I hope this has maybe expanded your mind a little, made you open to new possibilities, changed your perception of reality, of history. And yeah, I love you all very much. God bless you. Have a wonderful day. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video.